The discussion that we heard earlier on from Alec Cole-Hamilton obviously raises some very real issues, but of course the contribution, in my view, is entirely fatuous because it seeks to ignore some of the big determinants of what we're discussing. First of all, the comparison with other parts of the UK. Now, we get groans from other parts of the Chamber when the comparison is made with the UK, unless it's a comparison they want to make, of course. But, of course, the amount of resources that come to Scotland are determined by spending decisions in London. And they take those decisions quite rightly in view of what they believe the need to be. But Scotland just falls into place, as does Wales. And to try and ignore the extent to which that, including the capital cut to the NHS budget, derives from Westminster means it's not a real debate in that sense. And the other things which are disregarded, ignored in this debate is, of course, the fact that COVID is seen to be, as it was this week in the House of Commons, a justifiable reason to give for some of the issues in the NHS in England. It seems to be a justifiable reason to give in Wales, but not justifiable here in Scotland. I get it. No, I will not give. We've only got 4 minutes, and you've not been here during the whole of my discussion anyway. I would also say that the other thing which is unreal is the failure to acknowledge, and particularly for Alec Rowley, the fact that in Scotland we have higher paid NHS staff. We have more NHS staff, as Ivan McKee pointed out at the same time. We've had no strikes in the NHS. So if it's a genuine discussion about the condition of primary care services, presumably be some mention of that fact as well. And the fourth thing, which is not mentioned by other members, was mentioned by Ivan McKee, is of course the impact on the NHS of Brexit. And even the more recent announcement further restricting the ability of care workers to come to Scotland. No mention is made of it. So how real can this, how genuine can this discussion be if these things are completely ignored? And the other thing I would say as well, much of what comes out of the Chamber from the other parties is derogatory towards the NHS and its staff, usually dressed up by saying it's the SNP NHS. And I can say from my own experience, whether primary care or otherwise, including cancer care, even in the last couple of weeks, somebody I know who has had cancer was seen within 3 days, had a mammogram, had an ultrasound, saw the consultant twice, and was dealt with in 3 days. Now, I'm not saying that everyone gets that. I'm not trying to pretend there are not issues. There are not waiting lists, although where there are waiting lists, they are substantially shorter than in many other parts of the UK. And surely the more important discussion we should be having is how the spend on NHS services, including primary care in Scotland, compares with other countries, because that would give us a true comparison. Or what are they doing that's different that we could learn from? Because there's no question that I think the NHS has done an absolutely fantastic job, and the experience I just recounted about the last couple of weeks was even better during the midst of COVID. One instance I'll just quickly recall was a consultant seeing somebody I knew who had to have their gallbladder removed, emergency admittance to hospital that afternoon, and said since he was on that night, he would do it that night anyway, the same night as being diagnosed. And seeing how crammed that hospital was at the time, this was Glasgow Royal Infirmary, I think they've done an absolutely fantastic job. I just wish we'd heard more about that, the work that's been done in the NHS. And I just wish we could have a realistic debate where the constraints that operate in Scotland, as they do in Wales, as they do in Northern Ireland, because of the way the UK is structured, were at least acknowledged by the other parties. And I will be supporting the motion in the name of Neil Gray, the amendment in the name of Neil Gray, when we come to decision time.
Thank you, Mr Brown. We now move to the closing speeches. I call first Carol